Hi students, it's me, and I'm back with another lesson. Today we're going to be talking about lesson 9.5a, and it follows the topic of factoring out a GCF, which is short for greatest common factor. Our essential question for today is, what is a greatest common factor, and how do I factor it out? Now, when you are doing your factoring, one important thing to note is that factoring is simply the process of undoing distributing. So we want to make sure that we know that factoring is simply undoing or doing the opposite of distributing. So let's begin by reviewing, what do we do to distribute? When we distribute, you multiply each term in an expression by a number outside of it. When you're factoring, you divide each term by that common factor and write it outside of the parentheses. So I have an example here. We might ask you to factor 3x minus 6. Now, when factoring, it's really kind of a two-step process. The first step of the process is you want to look for a common factor between the terms. In this case, our terms are 3x and 6. The common factor between 3x and 6 is 3. Next, we're going to divide each of the terms by 3. And if you divide 3x by 3, you get x. And if you divide 6 by 3, you get 2. Notice that I've kept the minus sign attached because it was minus originally. To finish the process, we need to place the 3 that we factored out outside of the parentheses, and our final answer becomes 3 times x minus 2. Notice that factoring is the reverse of distributing. So before we do the process completely, let's begin by practicing figuring out what is a greatest common factor. To do this, we're going to list the factors for each term that is in or given in our problem. So to begin, in example A, we have 12 and we have 8x. When I list my factors of 12, factors are what multiplies to equal that. So factors of 12 are 1 and 12. I like to put them in order, so I'm putting 1 first, 12 last. 12 is divisible by 2, so I would say 2 and 6. And 12 is also divisible by 3, and 3 times 4 is 12. There are no other factors of 12. When I list out my factors of 8x, I like to list my variable first so I don't forget about it. Then I'm going to list the factors that multiply to the number 8. So I would have 1 and 8, and I would have 2 and 4, and there are no other factors. The next thing I do is I want to look at my factors and I want to find the greatest or largest factor between the lists. In this case, both lists contain the number 4. They also contain the number 2, but because 4 is greater, we would say the greatest common factor, or GCF, of these two terms is 4. Let's look at the next one. In the next problem, we have 10x and 15x squared. The factors of 10x are x, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Again, I like to list mine in order. You don't have to do that, but I just find it's easier. Factors of 15x squared are, because it's x squared, it's x listed twice. And then factors of 15 are 1 and 15, 3 and 5. As I look at these lists, a couple things jump out at me. This time, they both have an x in common. So I want to make sure I include that, as x is a variable, and we want to make sure that that is included in the problem, or our GCF. I also need to include the largest number. In this case, the largest number that shows up in both lists is going to be 5. So our greatest common factor here is going to be 5x. Now, for some of you, this is going to be really easy to get used to doing. Others, listing out the factors are going to be necessary. Now let's combine the process completely. I'm going to again review our initial problem that we started off with, and then we'll do 3 more examples together. So list the factors of each term. Let's begin by listing the factors of 3x and listing the factors of 6. Factors of 3x are x, 1, and 3. The factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, and 6. Determine the greatest common factor. In this case, the greatest common factor of these 2 lists is 3. Next, I need to undo the distributing and write the final answer. So recall, we are factoring the problem 3x minus 6. I'm going to factor out 3, which means I'm going to divide each term by 3. The 3 goes outside the parentheses, and when I divide 3x by 3, I'm left with x, and when I divide 6 by 3, I'm left with 2. Again, notice I kept the minus sign because that was the operation that was between the 3x and the 6. Let's go ahead and take a look at additional examples. In example A, I am going to look for my factors of negative 2x and 26. Now, in this case, the negative is out front, so it might just stay out there. Typically, that's what we find, but I want to include it. And so I have x, 1, and 2. For 26, I have 1 and 26, and 2 and 13. In this case, the greatest common factor is going to be 2. Now, another technique for factoring that sometimes students who struggle to do the division is to use the box method. We'll see this used in the future, so it's a nice time to introduce it. What we do is, because there were 2 terms, I place those inside of the boxes. And because the greatest common factor for this problem was a 2, I place it outside of the box. Next, I factor out what is in common. So next I factor out the 2. So negative 2x divided by 2 is negative x. 26 divided by 2 is 13. I can state my final answer as 2 times negative x plus 13. Let's try that on the next one. Instead of listing out my factors, I want you to think about what would be the greatest common factor here. In this case, the greatest common factor of 14x and 7 is 7. Next, I'm going to set up that box just to show you another example of how I can organize my problem. 14x and 7 go inside of the box. Next, I'm going to factor out my greatest common factor of 7. This gives me 2x and 1. This factors to 7 times 2x plus 1. All right, we have one more problem left. On the next problem, again, I'm going to ask you to list out your factors. Don't forget about the x's here. The greatest common factor for this particular problem is going to be 5 and x. Next, I'm going to create my box. I'm going to place 35x squared in the first and negative 15x in the second. I'm going to put my 5x on the outside of my box because that is my greatest common factor. Next, I'm going to divide the number in the box by what is outside of it. 35 divided by 5 is 7, and x squared divided by x is x. Another way to think about this is 5 times 7 is 35, and x times x is x squared. For the next one, what times 5x is negative 15x, or negative 3? The final answer here is 5x times 7x minus 3. As you can see, there are many ways to process these problems. I hope you are feeling more confident in factoring out a greatest common factor, and I look forward to talking with you about future lessons.